This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 256. Relative Values.
Today on the podcast, the economy is driven by the fundamental principle of value, which it seems can be interchangeably related to price. And through that, we get this efficient use of resources, giving people what they need or what they want, which might be fine if everyone earned the same amount of money, but they don't. So doesn't that make the whole concept of value as the way of ensuring the allocation of resources all a bit meaningless? We'll deconstruct another fundamental of economics today. After all, it is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. Well, pricing is a lousy measure of value, isn't it? Because it's the only measure we have. But, a rich person might buy something that's going to be of little value to them, which is of great value to a poor person who can't afford it. And yet we argue that the market mechanism where everything has a price ensures that we get the best allocation of resources. But how can that be? Because, in that example, if it provides a means for rich people to get stuff that's of little value to them and poor people don't get what they place a high value on, Steve, that is not the best allocation of resources, is it?
Yeah, this is the weakness of the usual neoclassical and, for that matter, Austrian economic fantasy, that the price system is effectively a dispassionate allocator of resources to the most efficient uses. And that's only true if the distribution of income itself is also the most efficient allocation of resources amongst people. And this is why neoclassicals have got the argument that what you get paid reflects your marginal product. And that's the additional amount you add to output of society. So it works in the aggregate sense. But what they say is that the last every worker is equally productive in their models. But the productivity of each worker declines as you add more workers to a production process, because you've got more and more people operating the machine. So you start with you have one worker per 5 shovels, and then you get to the stage of 5 workers for 5 shovels, and then you get 10 workers for 5 shovels. I wish I was joking, but I'm not. And then you have diminishing productivity because you're adding more workers to a fixed amount of capital. That's what gives them the idea of diminishing marginal productivity. And what they say is that when you work it out of the economic margin, if you were looking at the aggregate level, the pay paid to every worker reflects the marginal product of the last worker hired. Okay, so that's the idea. And then, of course, what they then take out of that is that you get paid what your social class, in that sense, contributes to production. So the fact that a worker gets a wage in America, if you're working in hospitality as a waiter, I think it's $2.37 per hour, supplemented by tips, which is the only reason you can survive as a waiter in America. While the restaurant owner, who might be taking home, if we're talking Starbucks, billions, that their marginal contribution is greater. So they have a meritocratic view of distribution of income, which is an essential part of saying that therefore the price system is a socially beneficial allocator of activities between one economic sector and another economic sector.
But even if you allowed for the fact that there will always be variations in income, still, for that, the reason that I explained at the beginning, it can never be an efficient mechanism for allocating, because it assumes that everyone is placing the same value on something, and that is clearly not the case. Some things are very important to some people and not important to others. So for some, it may be a frivolous need, and if they can afford to pay more for it because they have so much more money, they're placing less value, but they're prepared to pay more for it. That's against the whole argument, isn't it?
Well, you end up getting an income distribution and a class distribution effect on what gets purchased and what gets produced. Because, obviously, the supply of 200-foot-long yachts is not something which your demand or my demand has any influence on.
Well, you don't even need to go to that extent. You can just look now and say, well, okay, as we all return to our cafes to eat our mashed avocado with lemon on a nice granary loaf with a decent cup of coffee. How does that sound, Steve? That sounds pretty good to start the day, doesn't it? But meanwhile, while we're spending money on that, we could actually be spending that money on putting out vaccines to to Africa, where I think about 2% of the population has now been inoculated. So I mean, it works on a global level, doesn't it? Because I value that coffee and mashed avocado more than helping my fellow man. What a bastard I am.
Yeah, I mean, it's something which the basic idea that the neoclassical economists pump out with their supply and demand diagram, and that Austrians pump out by talking about the price system as an mechanism of allocation, which they say is far better than any other mechanism. For example, the government could be, the usual contrast they make between the price mechanism is saying, what about the government doing it? And they've got some grounds on that, because there's some quite funny instances back in the days when there was such a thing as socialism on the planet, when you had East Germany and West Germany, for example. I think it was Alex Nove who told the story of a bureaucrat from East Germany visiting West Germany and asking who was responsible for the allocation of bread. And the answer was, nobody. The market just does it. And he couldn't comprehend it, because to actually get that bread produced and delivered in the East Germany involved centralized production and then distribution officials who had to take it to particular spots, and allocation was based on your what card you had with your Communist Party. Maybe you got a better quality of bread than the other members, and so on. It was incredibly complicated and very hard to do, and this bureaucrat was run ragged doing it, and they said, well, we don't have a system, it's just the price system. So that side, that aspect, they're saying, well, the price system lets you have a way that things are distributed that doesn't involve bureaucrats in making the decisions, and then that can, if you want to contrast East German consumption levels to West German consumption levels, it can work out pretty damn beneficial for those in the market economy versus those in the centrally planned and centrally distributed economy. But it's still the myths that are loaded on top of that, by the way the neoclassicals think the price system actually operates, can only be made look perfectly socially fair if you accept the distribution of income as something that nobody objects to. Now, I don't suppose you object to Rupert Murdoch earning what he does, do you? His contribution to media, he's got a lot more newspapers than you have.
Yeah, if only you'd use it for good rather than evil, of course.
Exactly.
But look, marketers get, I spent a lot of my life in marketing, and we get around this idea that everyone places a different value on things and therefore are prepared to pay a different price by hiding the fact that we are charging different prices to different people. So, if you value an air ticket or a hotel room, and you place a lot of value on that, but you haven't got a great deal of money, you might book months in advance because there's special offers. But if you're rich but time poor, then and you don't really care about paying top price, then you could book it at the last minute and you pay that top price, and it might be twice what the person sitting next to you on the airplane is paying. And there's there's a few examples of that which you can work across a number of product types, but not all product types. So you can't differentially price bread, for example, apart from stuff that's left over at the end of the day. You want it slightly stale.
Yeah, but that's actually what analysis of price should be about, because it is quite a fascinating topic how marketers will segment a market depending upon the income capacity of different parts of that market. So, and we may never see it again, but the mass transportation market for airlines was a classic example, because as you said, if you wanted to get a cheap flight, then you had to lock it in very early, and there was no chance to get it altered, no chance to get it upgraded, no chance to get it refunded. And then you might pay, for a flight from Australia to United Kingdom return, you might pay, £1,000? Was that about a rough for economy discount seat? Or less?
No, 750 or something would be a good price. But there'd be like 15 or 20 perhaps different fare classes on one plane, because they were all sold in different ways to different people at different times, and and hope that the people don't find out just who's got the cheapest on that plane.
Yeah, well, and economics talks about this. They talk about neoclassicals talk about they call price discrimination, and they're actually against it, because they argue, well, this actually means that all of what they call the consumer surplus gets taken by the producers. So the way that mainstream economics thinks about the welfare effect of pricing comes down to saying there should only be one price. okay? Because at that one price, you have the magical intersection of the supply curve and the demand curve, and then at that point, if you draw a horizontal line, which is the price, across to where you reach the intersection of supply and demand, the area of the triangle, if you draw it, they always draw straight lines. They're too damn lazy to draw curved ones because, frankly,
it's hard with a shaky hand, isn't it?
Too many gins for breakfast, that sort of thing.
You can use a ruler if you're drawing a straight one.
Yeah. Well, you got to find one. I mean, most economists are as messy as I am. I can't find a bloody ruler in this room. But anyway, they draw a straight line. So you got a triangle above the price and a triangle below the price. And the triangle above the price, they'll say that's producer surplus, and the triangle that's consumer surplus, and the triangle below it they'll call producer surplus. And the reason that they want one price ruling is that you get the maximum area being shared between producers and consumers if there's just one price. But if you have the companies saying, well, we know somebody's willing to pay, looking out at the demand curve as they draw it. So you have people who are willing to pay a really high price to get that product, but there's only a small number of them. Well, if you charge them a really high price for that and you get that price off them, then the producer gets, if you again think about the whole lot of histograms going up from the quantity axis up to the demand curve, if the producer does that and successfully segments the market, say, into 10 different categories, then they're getting those histograms, and all that's left for the consumers are the small bits of the triangles at the top. And that's seen as being really, really bad and discriminatory and so on. But in the real world, which unfortunately where we actually live rather than economics textbooks, if we lived in textbooks there'd be no problems, but in the real world you wouldn't actually have that 747 flying from London to UK, Australia as cheaply as it was doing for the vast majority, unless you had those prices being underwritten. So the wealthy sitting up in first class, which I have done on 2 occasions, I have to say, flying from London to New York.
Did they ask you to go back to your seat? Did they ask
Very
you?
funny. No, actually, I got invited to speak at a conference in New York,
and they paid.
And from when I was working in London, and I've forgotten it was paid for. But the funny thing was, and this is the segmentation thing going on. The prices for the tickets in first class were cheaper than business.
Yeah.
Okay, so I decided I was going to, for once in my life, I was going to fly first class. Frankly, it wasn't worth it, except for the fact that I could say I touched down before the pilot did, because in first class in British Airways, you sat in the nose, and therefore I was the first person to land on the tarmac. A bit of a laugh, but yeah, if it wasn't for people paying high prices for the first class, then the average price for a whole plane would be higher. Yeah. So, I think...
And that's the reason why it's done, obviously, because then the fewer people will be able to afford it, therefore the revenue. And that's all they can care about, the EBIT at the end of the day. How much money have we raked in for this plane taking off versus the cost of it? And let's get the mix, the yield. I mean, there's yield control experts who say, how many seats can we flog to get the best possible yield based on who's out there in the market who's prepared to pay, and then hence the differential pricing. But that works in everything. I mean, you can't say. I mean, it's a crazy notion. I mean, and I know, you say that my problem is I'm bringing the real world into neoclassic economics. If you're buying a ring, for example, just say all wedding rings are the same price. So it doesn't matter whether you get a ring. Should I get the ruby one, or should I get the big diamond with those little encrusted diamonds around the outside? It doesn't matter, because they're all the same price, because there's only one price for rings. This
is when you think about how tragically and childishly simplified the neoclassical economic vision of what a market is about, it's just nonsense. Ring. I mean, there's no such thing as a market for rings. Where you can apply the supply, as you said, there's, the ring on my wife's finger is a damn sight smaller than the one on Brad Pitt's current whatever his ex-wife was, the idea that there's such a thing as a market for cars, where there's just a thing called a car that one buys, is nonsense. There's an incredibly differentiated market out there. for transportation systems. And what you're buying when you buy a transportation system is often a signal. And, if people buy a Lamborghini, not because it gets you to work faster, but because everybody breaks their neck turning to look at you as you drive past. And so there is an interesting richness to the actual way markets operate, where it's diversified products. You cannot call. I actually went past one this morning, a Hillman, I think it was. A Hillman versus a Lamborghini both have four wheels and a steering wheel and can get you from point A to point B. In one case, people are pointing at you and laughing at the vehicle you're in, and the other going, wow, look at the vehicle you're in. So we should, if we're actually looking at price sensibly, then we should be looking at it that way, as it actually is a phenomenon in real markets and in the real world. But instead, we have this totally stupid stylized drawing diagram from which people derive completely ridiculous ideas about how markets should operate.
So, I mean, you sometimes go to, and there's not many of them around, and they don't seem to be around for very long, so that shows it doesn't work. But you have restaurants where they say, well, pay us what you think it's worth. So, so in other words, whatever the value it is to you, you pay us. And that would be, I mean, it's a utopian vision, but that would be the ideal world, wasn't it? Because we do have this problem that value and price are not the same thing, because it means different things to different people. Whereas if you're able to say, well, actually, tell us what you value it at and pay the equivalent, then that goes, that is differential pricing. But of course, it has to be inverse to your income, doesn't it? So a poor household values electricity more than a rich one. So, economists, I'm sure, would argue, well, if you value it more, you should pay more for it. But, whereas rich households, it's not very important to me. It's just discretionary. So, well, in that case, we'll charge you less for it.
This is where you can't talk about the price system unless you also talk about the income distribution system.
Yeah.
And that's the Achilles heel of this whole analysis, because to get the idea of the supply and demand and equilibrium price out of their models, they have to assume that everybody is happy with the distribution of income, which is why I raised Rupert Murdoch a short while ago. You see the supply and demand curve, looks nice and simple. Okay, now you're upward sloping supply, yeah, fair enough, we can put up with that. I'll explain why you can't later. Downward sloping demand curve, yeah, fair enough. Intersection, that determines the price, yeah, looks okay. Okay, when they tried to make it all stick together, things didn't work out so well. So here's Samuelson in his textbook, which is now edited by William Nordhaus, one of my favourite people, as you know. And this is in Samuelson and Nordhaus 2010 textbook. The market demand curve is found by adding together the quantities demanded by all individuals at each price. Does the market demand curve obey the law of downward sloping demand? ? It certainly does. Okay, now I knew that was bullshit when I first read it, because I'd already read the other research, and by economists before Samuelson, pointing out the ridiculous conditions that were necessary for that actually to be true. Because this is going to get fairly technical, but I'll try to.
Well, we've done two podcasts recently on why the supply curve and the demand curve are wrong. So So I won't point people back to the other ones. Okay, but Samuelson argues that you can derive what he calls a family indifference curve by presenting the family acts as if it was maximizing its joint welfare function. And he says, since blood is thicker than water, the preferences of different members of the interrelated by what we might call a consensus or social welfare function, which takes into account the deservingness or ethical worths of the consumption levels of each member of the members, the family acts as if it were maximizing their joint welfare function. What it means is nobody goes shopping in a family until everybody's handed all the income into a barrel. Mum, dad, and the kids get together and decide which each one of them is worth, hand it out that way, and nobody complains about what the other member of the family gets. And then he says, okay, how do we get that? So there's a family social welfare function. How do we get a social one? Oh, it's simple. The same argument will apply to all of society if optimal reallocations of income can be assumed to keep the ethical worth of each person's marginal dollar equal. Well, there's a big if in that. There's a big if. I mean, he's probably right, isn't he? If that word if wasn't.
But that's why Rupert Murdoch sends you a check for $200 every day. Okay, because he knows he's got to give it to you to make you feel happy about the amount that is crap. It is crap.
It is crap. So that big if, I love that big if everybody did that, then
she doesn't. So therefore,
there's no point in discussing it.
So throw their diagram in the garbage bin.
Yeah. Because he's right at the family level, of course. That you do look after the rest of your family, obviously, and if like a parent will throw some money out to the kids if the kids are running short, so long as they as long as they value that money in some way.
Pardon me, but
you're not going to talk about your sister now.
No. We don't talk about my family, but most of my family have a lot of time. But a very, very good family. But not all families are good.
No, exactly.
But this is the nonsense that's necessary to support that simple vision. And when you see that's nonsense, you throw the simple vision away and say what actually happens in the real world. And that's where the sort of product segmentation and market differentiation stuff, I was talking about earlier, that's the real world. And that would be fascinating to examine properly. But this crap nonsense idea gets in people's minds and they think that's what describes the real world. It's got nothing to do with the real world.
So the danger of this idea that price will help us determine the best allocation of resources is dangerous, of course, for the planet, because the problem is to satisfy the spending of the very rich, we produce a lot of stuff that's of little societal benefit. It's probably only of fleeting interest to the buyer. It just sort of amuses them for 5 minutes, but it chews up resources. Now, it creates jobs, of course, for people making that stuff, and that helps money flow around the economy. But that seems to be the only focus, doesn't it? Let's make stuff that creates jobs. So that's all good. So if rich people demand stuff that creates jobs, then that's the economy flowing around. But the fact is they are also chewing up resources. So they may buy stuff which is heavily dependent on resources because they place less value on those resources than the person who is struggling to pay their energy bill. So not only is it a misallocation of resources, which is, bad for the operation of an economic system, it's also very bad for the planet, because by following this approach, we are going to chew up more than we need to across the world.
Yeah, and we're doing it on a massive scale. And if you then look at it and say, well, can we now reallocate this stuff to make up for the fact that it was a distorted distribution of income when this was how the price system allocated what was made. How many shares would you like to have in Bill Gates's yacht or whatever it is, or Larry Ellison's second yacht, et cetera, once we realised that this stuff was allocated by a totally distorted distribution of income, and therefore it was possible for people like Larry Ellison to buy an enormous yacht, rather than us having, a decent transportation system in London, for example, you can't. It's wasted. It's gone, and this is all the stuff which is buried behind these, androgynous curves of supply and demand in economic textbooks.
Yeah. And it also, of course, adds to that rich-poor gap as well. It makes the divide worse. So Bitcoin is a great example of where value goes astray, isn't it? Because here's something that contributes absolutely nothing to society.
Oh, boy, we're going to get done, aren't we, by the Bitcoin?
Well, but
lobby?
it clearly fuck them. Sorry to use that. But seriously, here is a bunch of people who just talk up the price of something that has no underlying value to it. The only thing it contributes to is the creation of money for people who have that money. If you don't have the money to be able to buy it in the first place, you're out of the game. But meanwhile, it consumes power. Now, that power, that is placing demand on players. It's placing demand on microchips, because people are wanting to mine for Bitcoin, and those microchips could be used for something productive, couldn't they? But no, they're being used to mine for Bitcoin to satisfy the money creation of existing Bitcoin holders who just want to have more. And look, it could also be elevating, because it uses power, elevating power prices beyond the reach of low-income households. So the power that could be used to heating a home is being used to mine for Bitcoin. That is how twisted society has become. And it's all because of what we place on value. And the value for Bitcoin holders is they just want to be richer.
Yeah.
There we are. God, that feels so good. I've been wanting to say that for so long. We have so many ways in which the price system distorts what capitalism is good at, rather than enhancing it. And the only way, if you actually wanted to get the price system working in any overall, make it relatively fair compared to what it is right now, would be to abolish inheritance. Yeah.
Because the myth that comes out of mainstream economics is that you, as I said, you get your marginal product. choose a child at random. I mean, Tom Hanks's son. Apparently he's got some hassles in the family there, talking about potentially dysfunctional families. But is Tom Hanks's worth would be determined by Tom Hanks's son's worth would be determined by what he inherits from Tom Hanks. So there's a bit of a head start involved, in other words. I mean, let's take the Trump family. I don't know how far Eric would have got without if somebody else other than Donald was his father. So the inheritance gives an enormous head start to the wealthy and an enormous handicap to the poor. So if you wanted to make it fair, you'd say, okay, you should be in favour of complete 100% inheritance tax, so that we all start at the same point in life. And of course, that's the last thing anybody who believes in capitalism would actually agree to or contemplate. The opposite has happened. They've driven inheritance taxes down towards zero. So once you start with an unfair distribution system and you compound it by inheritance, you can forget about saying the price system is a dispassionate way of allocating resources.
Well, we'll talk about that more next week because because I know what you're saying, and for a long time I've agreed with you on that. But I've got kids, and so I'll give you my perspective on it because it is cats. Exactly, and they're not going to live as long as you probably. So but look, so there's a different view on that, but we'll explore that next time because we're going to look at the value of now, how everything is very much short-term thinking at the moment. So, but let's get back to value because it comes from the inherent value. Obviously, is basic commodities. There's value that we place on oil and energy because they are important to to how we do things. Then we add value to things by making them, like making cars, for example. And then there's all that rent seeking that goes on, which is passive income, in other words, where you make money from having money. And the last one is only placing value on the fact that you have money, not a value on what money can do for you. So isn't this part of the problem that we should be placing? I mean, the idea that you can make money from having money and the value associated with that, the idea it's just going to make you richer. That's not really a value, is it? That's not really a benefit, except for the fact that you would then spend that money on other things, but you probably spend most of it on making even more money. That's no value to you really, or to society.
Yeah. And this is, again, if you look at where neoclassical economics comes from, one thing they'll argue is that the supply of labour depends upon the wage. So if you offer a higher wage, you'll have more workers offering the services for jobs because there's a higher pay rate. And then if you cut the wage, the argument is, well, the supply will fall because workers will look at it and think, it's not worth me going out to work, I'll stay at home and enjoy leisure instead. But you can only enjoy leisure instead by not going to work if you have an independent source of income apart from working. And this is the vision they have, that fundamentally we're all little peasant entrepreneurs, and we have our own little self-sufficient production stash back at home. So if we don't, we're only going to go out for work for a wage. If we get offered a higher wage than we can earn in terms of subsistence by working our own little plot of land. And that is not the real world. That is not anything like the real world. You work because you simply damn well have to, and that's why you accept shit wages and shit conditions. Not because they're better than what you have back at home, because you haven't got anything else back at home. You simply have to offer your labour to get that job. So the vision they have is everything is voluntary. That underlies it, but that would only be true if we had a basic income scheme. If we had basic income, then yes, it would be true. You might get an increase in supply of labour if the wage rate was so much better than the basic income. Then you thought, well, okay, rather than subsisting on basic income, which I can survive on, I'm going to go there and put a few hours of labour in. But that's not the real world. We don't have that basic income, and without it, all the arguments they make about the market and allocation are another myth.
Well, actually, it's interesting you say that because they're going through that in the United States right now, in that extra $300 per week that was paid to unemployed people. You have a lot of Republicans and Republican states saying, well, we're going to stop that now because companies are finding it difficult to find people, particularly in lower paid jobs, because it's, they're not really getting that much more than they're getting on unemployment benefits, so they're not returning to work. So the easiest way to fix that is not to, say, well, actually, we need to pay these people more. It's we actually need to withdraw that $300 benefit. So lots of Republican states
abolish their capacity to be yeoman farmers, effectively. Self-sufficient yeoman farmers, and force them to have to go and work in the factory, where it can be, what's
that's what capitalism's all about.
Yeah, and we paper over it with this vision of, of voluntarism underlying people's involvement in the market when it's not voluntary. That you have a choice between you work or you starve.
Yeah.
And in that situation, you'll put up with shit you wouldn't put up with otherwise, and that partially leads to the sort of, the level of dysfunctionality we see in society these days because. People at the bottom of the income earning bracket, those who are working and getting lousy pay, aren't exactly favorably disposed towards those at the top.
There's a couple of things we could do, though, on this, given that we're not going to change the economic system. But what we could do is recognise the relativity of value. By the way, Mark Carney's new book is looking a lot at this. You might I'm only into the first few pages, but he is talking about value and income distribution quite a bit in his book. So for a central banker, maybe now he's not got that gig anymore. He can actually say what he really thinks. So it might be worth a read. But look, the idea that we have different values placed on things, we can the stuff that we do through the public sector that we could apply. So for example, if you get a speeding ticket, it's the same whether you're very rich or very poor. So a poor person might actually drive more cautiously because they can't afford the ticket, whereas a rich person arguably is not going to care unless it means that they're going to lose their license. So surely we should base speeding tickets and any other sort of like public sector fees, whether they're fines or fees, should be directly related to income, shouldn't they? So, so if you if a poor person feels like they're going to lose their car if they get a speeding ticket because they just can't afford it, then a rich person should be told, well, okay, you should lose your whatever it is, your Mercedes C class. Well, that's middle income, isn't it? Really, but you're gonna lose your Porsche, if we catch you speeding. It should be relative like that.
Yeah. But of course that's when you start doing it, then you're going to get some protest from the rich, because what is money worth if you can't get power from having it?
Yeah, and I guess that's the value. When we talked about people having money to create money, that's the value that they are placing on that is the power that comes from it. That's the dimension, isn't it? That's what they're buying.
Yeah, fundamentally, the power system is a price system. Unless you have a fair distribution of income, then the price system is also a power system. Yeah. And that's what's left out of the textbooks because they try to pretend that capitalism is a system without power. Well,
so
not on this planet.
Not on this planet, no. So you talked about, well, maybe if you go to Mars, you can create the power. You create your own system there. But it wouldn't be much of a life, though, would it? Look, you talked about in previous podcasts, and we've talked about it a lot, about the idea that maybe there is an argument, you talked about earlier in this podcast, the idea of a universal basic income. You've also talked about the idea that we should be giving credits to people for energy, so that in a way energy becomes another currency that exists, in that you can only use so much energy per person, and if you want to use more, you're going to have to buy it off somebody else, which could help the rich-poor gap. Well, I wonder whether you could throw into that approach this idea of looking at value, and there's two types of things. There's essentials, and then there's discretionary. And the problem is that some of the essentials are taken away or become more expensive because they are discretionary for people who are richer. So what if you had a universal basic income that was issued as a new digital currency, and you can use that to buy your essentials like food and power? So if you're a low income earner, or the only source of income you have is your universal basic income, then you get your digi-currency, and it would be the same value as the existing currency, but things would be cheaper if you paid for them in that currency. So power, for example, might be 10p per kilowatt hour in this new currency, but if you buy it in the main currency, then free market forces are going to apply there, and it's going to be the people who are using it more as a discretionary item, and therefore the prices are going to be higher. So that, if you did something like that, I don't know whether there's some thinking there that could be explored further, but by splitting the two and making sure that those who have an essential need are getting it paid for at a lower price, then you can let the free market operate with the rest of usage. Does that make sense?
It's feasible. It does make sense. I mean, if you look back at the sort of 50s and 60s period as well, there's a way in which that was the accidental outcome of the state of the market after the Second World War and the Great Depression, when the emphasis of government policy, and this is global, was on welfare for the majority, not the flexibility of the wealthy. So that's the and that was a society where you had a broader acceptance of capitalism and the free market than you have now. And a large part of it was because people at the bottom were doing fairly well out of it. Now, because the whole emphasis has gone to the whole neoliberal, let the market rip attitude, and you've had this incredible skewing of distribution of income through growth of inheritance, through the growth of private debt as well, which is it's a possession. It's a possession of the wealthy and a penalty for the poor. All that stuff means people are feeling much less well disposed towards capitalism these days, and it's funny to watch American commentators wonder why the young generation is so pro-socialism. Well, they haven't exactly liked the version of capitalism you guys have created. That's why.
Look, next time I want to look at the problem with now, because that relates to a lot of this. Our focus is all on the here and now. What about future generations? Like, for example, climate change. What are we doing about that? So we'll talk about that next week. Good to talk, Steve.
Okay, mate. Yep.
And so hopefully you can join us for that. I'm Phil Dobbie. He's Steve Keen. See you next week. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.